Welcome to the AACS Daily News. Attleboro State Representative Jim Hawkins has raised concerns that the state's latest budget proposal cuts what would be school aid for the Attleboro Public Schools and similar school districts across the state. We spoke with him to learn more.
Jim Hawkins, I am the state representative for Attleboro, 2nd Bristol District. I have been an advocate, particularly as a retired teacher from Attleboro High School, for public school related items, and the budget has always been an issue for Attleboro. We've never gotten really good funding from the state. The way that the funding works, it's always by a formula. It's not like each town gets preference or doesn't get preference. The formula is called Chapter 70, and it creates what they call the foundation budget. But the purpose behind this in the early 90s was to equalize education opportunities between the very wealthy communities and the other communities that were not so wealthy. The problem is it never got upgraded from the early 90s. 92, I think, is when it was designed. And since then, we have computers, we have MCAS, we have special ed reform, there's increase in healthcare costs. There's a whole lot of things that weren't part of the formula in the 90s. 2 years ago, we passed the Student Opportunity Act. To change this formula, to make it equitable, and to make sure that it would take care of the low-income school districts took 2 or 3 years of hard work on that, particularly in the hot part of the Education Committee, but a lot of people put a lot of work into it. One of the features of this new Student Opportunity Act was that it increased what would be considered a low-income student from families with 133% of federal poverty level to 185% of federal poverty level. The governor failed to include this change in his version of it in House 1 last year, so it meant that Attleboro would have gotten zero money from Student Opportunity Act, despite being a gateway city. And what's happened this year is that the governor has counted enrollment from October 2020. And what happened last fall is that a lot of parents withdrew their younger kids, kindergartners, first graders. They're easy to keep home, and they'll for sure be back in the fall. This is terribly unfortunate because it has no reflection on population changes in the city. It was a temporary situation. And what this has meant for Attleboro in this year's governor's budget is that we're shorted by $2 million over what we would get. So instead of 2.1, I think it is, it's $180,000, which doesn't even pay for increases in janitor costs, step increases. It doesn't even cover the annual increase in expenses. What we're advocating for is to change the enrollment figures to fall of 2019. There's not significant population changes since then. That would be a much more accurate count of how many students are in our system. And that by itself would mean $120 million that the Student Opportunity Act is short. If they counted by October of 2019, they'd need another $120 million. The other thing is that Student Opportunity Act was long overdue. Except for COVID, we really wanted it to be implemented last year. It's not fair to just put it back a year. Other thing we're advocating for, instead of doing 2 years this year, to do a 6, divided over the next 6 years. So that would be another $24,000. So total between those two to change it to fall of 2019 enrollment figures and 161616 would make it $154 million. The problem is there's an agreed upon revenue. So if you take $154 million and put it into Student Opportunity Act, that means $154 million has to come out of something else in the budget that we're probably counting on: housing for homeless people, health care, climate change, a lot of other things that are equally as important. That's the juggling act. The good news is, I think a month ago, nobody really understood why these figures were so low, and they do now. Mass Budget has come out with figures indicating that it's all because of the enrollment. Mass Superintendents Association, Mass Association of School Committees, Mass Teachers Association have all done the analysis and come up that this is an issue with an unfair enrollment figure. It does not represent the population of any of these cities, nor does it represent the population of Attleboro. Cautiously, I'm going to say I think we might be able to prevail on this. It's taken a lot of work with a lot of us being very vocal